So I know a lot of you have found it very fascinating to hear about the Legacy Standard Bible, the revision of the New American Standard Bible that John MacArthur announced recently. And I saw that there was an update that he did, Shepherd's Conference monthly update, where he talks a little bit more in detail about the Legacy Standard Bible. So because so many people are interested in this, and I'm fascinated by it too, I thought it would be neat to talk about that today. Before we get into what John MacArthur says about the Legacy Standard Bible, I wanted to mention that Bible translation is a topic of interest for me. I've covered it on this channel quite a bit. So if you'd like to check out my Bible translation series, I encourage you to do that because I give a little bit of background on a lot of the major translations that are out there. And kind of as a follow-up or another resource going along with what I'm doing with my videos, I've been working on a new project on Bible translation that I made a recent announcement about, and it's a booklet on Bible translations. Now, I do want to say very clearly, this is a booklet. This is not a tome. It's not a large volume. So don't be expecting something that's just going to have tons of detailed information. This is really just supposed to be something simple, kind of like a little guide to help people that don't know a lot about Bible translation. So the booklet that I'm working on, the goal is just for people to know a little bit more about each major Bible translation and kind of give them some guidance on how to choose a Bible translation for themselves. So, I really just want something for the average everyday layperson to help them out because Bible translation topics can be really overwhelming. So I wanted to let you know about that project, which goes right along with what we're talking about today, yet another English Bible translation. And I know some of you, when you hear about another English Bible translation, you get really excited. You love it. You're like, yes! More translations to choose from, or more translations to analyze. And then others of you are like, no! Why do we have so many English Bible translations? And I get it. There's different ways of looking at this. You could probably guess which side I fall on. I like looking at new things and analyzing different things. So I kind of like the idea that we have another translation. On the other hand, I do think that there are probably too many English Bible translations, to be honest. It doesn't really create a unified approach to Scripture, or even an idea that we all have one Bible we're using. So I think that can be a problem. But at the same time, there are reasons we have different Bible translations, and I talk about that in other videos. So what John MacArthur is saying about the Legacy Standard Bible, again, this is an update of the New American Standard Bible. So the idea is that this is going to take the New American Standard Bible, which he says is already a really good translation, and he says they want to refine it. So I use the word revision. He uses the word refining. Refining has the idea, I think, of trying to just take something and make it a bit better, to tighten it up, and I think that's his view. But it really is a revision. I mean, they are changing things in the New American Standard Bible, pretty significant changes. So he talks about that in this update, and he talks about some more minor, subtle changes as well as some large changes. The goal in this, though, is to be more literal, or accurate is a word he uses a lot, and consistent. So toward the beginning, he talks about being more literal and consistent in their approach than the original NASB. Now, again, he likes the NASB and looks at it as the most accurate English translation, but he thinks they could improve on that and not only improve accuracy, but consistency of word choice. So in talking about refining the NASB, some of the subtle changes, he mentions some examples. such as changing an imperfect tense verb in the original language to an imperfect tense verb in English. So I guess it might be the idea of this person was walking or was talking, I think would be an imperfect tense example. So they want to have consistency or accuracy going from the original language and the tenses that are used to English. So he says there are subtle changes, but he also says there are going to be some significant or large changes to the NASB. And he gives a couple of examples that he gave in another video. The word for God, the name of God, traditionally has been translated as capital L-O-R-D, all capitals. And so we will see in translations often in the Old Testament the word Lord. And sometimes, if it's not all capitals, that's referring to Adonai. But sometimes that's referring to the name of God, if it's all capitals, L-O-R-D. And that's the name that, as best we know how to pronounce it, is Yahweh. So he says the Legacy Standard Bible is going to use the term Yahweh, which is really fascinating. And then he also says they're going to translate the word doulos. He actually mentions in this video the book that he wrote on the word doulos as being the correct translation, in his view, being slave. So those are some of the larger changes. And again, I would argue this really kind of echoes some of his theological stances. So I really think some of his viewpoints are going to come into this Bible translation. Some people are very happy about that. Some people probably not as happy. But again, there's a reason we have so many different Bible translations. And this will have a certain bent to it. Now, what he says kind of in summary is that the rest of the refinements are going to increase the already high quality of the New American Standard Bible. So what he basically is saying is that the New American Standard Bible is already great. They just want to make it even better. So that makes sense, but he does talk about consistency as well. Not only these changes to make it more accurate, but also to make it more consistent. And the idea here, I think, is that you want to take words and be consistent in how you translate this word, so that if Paul uses a certain word, or John uses a certain word, or whatever author uses a certain word, you can see how they're using that word consistently. And MacArthur talks about connecting the dots, so that maybe this word that's used in the Old Testament, we can see it in the New Testament as well. And we can say, okay, yeah, I see the ideas, how they're connected, because there's consistent word choices for translating those terms. So, yeah, there's a lot to be said for that, and that's the strength of the word-for-word translation. He also, in this update, I think this is interesting, he gives an explanation of the name Legacy Standard Bible. I heard one comment on the video that I did that said, why do all these translations have to use the word standard? Because we don't really have one standard translation, I think was basically what they were saying. But MacArthur points out that the word standard really has to do with the idea of something that is accurate, or is a word-for-word translation that you can say, okay, this is something you can look to. It's like something you could say, yeah, this is clearly what the standard is for accuracy. So because it's a word-for-word translation, formal equivalency is the approach. Then he says a good word to denote that is standard. And then legacy, he says, has to do with the fact that so many translations are being updated all the time. They're constantly updating translations, and so they want to have something that isn't going to be changing all the time. And now I know a lot of you out there are going to be really happy about that. You don't like the fact that Bible translations are always doing updates. And I got to be honest, I mean, I use the New King James quite a bit, so that tells you about me. I liked how the King James lasted for so long, and the New King James comes along and makes some changes that, after a few hundred years needed to be made in terms of English and so on. But by and large, I don't like doing too many changes. But I've also said that I do appreciate translations that are giving us more up-to-date scholarship and ways of communicating. So I don't mind new translations, but I get it that these translations so often are just constantly being updated. It feels a little ridiculous at times. So what he says is they want to have a Bible that isn't always trying to be updated. And he points out that a lot of the updates have to do with accommodating the vernacular language or accommodating the culture, the cultural trends. And I've talked about that. I think that is a danger where, our translation, instead of just saying what the author said, we're always thinking, well, yeah, but what does that mean in our culture? And so you can end up kind of phrasing things in a way that the authors of the Bible never actually put things. So I get it. I think that makes a lot of sense. So he says that they want, and he kind of summarizes here, he wants to take the best translation, refine it just a bit, and make it the legacy for future generations. So that's the goal of the Legacy Standard Bible, to take the NASB, refine it, and make it a legacy for future generations that's not going to be changed a whole lot. So maybe for some of us who live long enough, in another 30 years, 40 years, maybe there will be an update to the Legacy Standard Bible, the new Legacy Standard Bible. I don't know. I'd be curious, how long will they keep it the same? At some point, maybe it would be updated, Hopefully, we'll all be in heaven before that ever happens, right? The Lord will return before. But anyway, that's kind of his overview. And I just wanted to give some commentary as well and say, I think in listening to this video, I know a lot of you will listen to it. I'll leave a link in the description below this video so that you can go and watch what John MacArthur says. I think he sells it really well, and I know a lot of you are gonna be excited about the Legacy Standard Bible, and to be honest, listening to him talk, I think it's going to be a neat translation. But I do think it's important as a caveat to just remind everybody that the Hebrew and Greek languages are not English. I know you know that, but it's easy to think, I've got this English translation that is like exactly like the original, and that's just not true. If you read an interlinear Bible, which just takes Greek words and tries as best as possible to put them in English, it doesn't always make a lot of clear sense. So you need to change things to go from one language to another. Words don't match perfectly from one language to another. There's not a word in English that matches with another word in Greek all the time. Think of how we use the word love, right? And then think about the Greek word love. And as many of you know, there's multiple words for love in Greek. So, there's not always a perfect word to match another word in another language. Also, how we construct sentences. We have a certain way that we put sentences together. And Greeks, Hebrew speakers, and writers had different ways of conveying their thoughts than we do. And so sentence construction and even tenses of verbs would be another example. I mean, you've probably heard people use, the past tense in unique ways where if you're talking about Bob was talking to me, right? So this was in the past. And then someone theoretically could say, Bob says to me. Now, the past tense would actually be Bob said to me. But some people will say Bob says to me, even though they're talking about the past. So you can do that in English, and as far as I understand it, sometimes in Greek, that's how things were. And in the King James Bible, sometimes you'll actually see that, where even though it's talking about the past, they'll use a present verb. But the point I'm making is that that's not typically how we talk. And it would be interesting to see if the Legacy Standard Bible actually went that far with being literal. And, point that I would really want to make here is that sometimes less literal actually captures the idea better. Certainly can put it in a better way in English, but sometimes it even captures the idea better than a really literal translation. If you get too literal, sometimes you miss the meaning. Now, you can put a footnote. Sometimes you can put a footnote. And I know some of you out there, you're like, that's what I want. I want a literal translation and then put maybe the less literal meaning in a footnote. And you know what? A Bible like that can be good to have in your study because it gives you a resource. But for the everyday person reading the Bible, if they read expressions that in the text as they're reading, I'll give you an example where the Bible talks about cleanness of teeth. Now, I think in the context you can figure it out when it's talked about there. I think it's in the book of Amos. But if I said God will give you cleanness of teeth, what does that mean? I mean, that is a literal translation. What does it mean? A lot of you know because you've studied that it means God is going to keep you from having food, right? You're not going to have the food, and therefore you're going to have clean teeth because you're not eating. Okay, what's the best way to translate that? Well, again, you could put a footnote and explain that. A lot of translations that are more traditional use the phrase cleanness of teeth. But you could see how a less literal translation might actually bring that idea out better for the average everyday reader. So I guess in all of this, I just want to say, if you do use the Legacy Standard Bible when it comes out, if you decide that that's a translation you really want to get into, just remember it's not the perfect translation. And again, it's just a call to everybody not to become tribalistic and break up into all these different groups based on which Bible translation you use. I really think that's a problem in Christianity with so many things. We break up into groups based on all different kinds of things that are in some ways secondary. I get it. These are important matters, how we translate the scripture. But I mean, we just find all kinds of reasons to say, okay, yeah, the reason I don't really like those Christians or associate closely with those Christians, might be the better way to put it, is because of this, that, or the other thing. And it's like we just constantly have reasons to keep ourselves at arm's distance from other Christians. So, as long as we don't do that, as long as we say, yeah, this is another resource for us to have, and maybe it's a translation that a lot of us will prefer, that's fine, as long as it doesn't breed division. In one of my videos, someone actually kind of attacked me and said that I'm breeding division because I think they thought I was attacking someone, but I'm not. I'm actually saying we have to be careful when we get into these issues that we don't start dividing based on our own personal viewpoints and preferences. So again, that's why I like to do videos, to get us to be able to talk about these things, think through them, also to be informed so that we don't start to judge people based on misinformation. So I think it's really important to have thorough knowledge and correct knowledge about issues. So I've talked at length now about this Legacy Standard Bible update. I hope it's been helpful and interesting to you. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please leave them in the comments. If you haven't subscribed to this channel, I would encourage you to do that. It really helps the channel out if you subscribe and hit the bell notification so that you know when my videos are published. But also, if you could share videos that you think are good with other people, share them on social media, share them with others, tell people about this channel. That really helps. YouTube does share my videos to some degree, but it doesn't share them a whole lot. So you sharing them with other people really helps. Thank you so much for listening to all these different thoughts that I have on Bible translation, and specifically the Legacy Standard Bible, brought to you from a First Perspective.